manage Krishi Gyandeep Knowledge Lecture Series 29. A warm welcome to you all. Today we are having eminent person from NIRD Panchayat Raj from varied field of experiences like agriculture and allied sectors or even developmental sectors. Today, faculty members and other participants are joining with us for this Krishi Gyandeep Knowledge Lecture Series. And these lecture series are captured into video films through managed YouTube channel and also social media to reach last mile extension worker and also to reach these experiences mainly for the officers of different departments of agriculture and allied sectors, agriculture universities and ICR institutions, KVKs, NGOs and public at large. And today we are very much fortunate enough, Honorable Dr. Narendra Kumar ji, IAS, Director General NIRDPR. And today's topic is on convergence opportunities for rural development and agriculture. Welcome you, sir, for this Krishi Gyandeep Knowledge Lecture Series 29. Now I request our Director General to introduce today's eminent person, Dr. G. Narendra Kumar ji, to our August gathering, please.
Good afternoon to everyone. Honorable Speaker of today's Krishi Gyandeep Knowledge Lecture Series 29, Dr. G. Narendra Kumar ji, Director General NIRD and PR Hyderabad, my colleague Dr. Renukarani, my other colleagues who are present in this hall. Today we have large number of participants from different parts of the country. It is a great opportunity for them. And also the participants of Jai Jawan Kisan and some of our students are also participating in our Krishi Gyandeep Knowledge Lecture Series. On behalf of Managed Family, I would like to welcome you all to this Knowledge Lecture Series 29. Sir, regarding Krishi Gyandeep talk, what is this Krishi Gyandeep Knowledge Lecture Series? Manage is supposed to strengthen agricultural extension systems in the country. Basically, the last mile extension worker who delivers extension knowledge to the farmer, we don't have any access to him because we are supposed to train middle and senior level officers. So to reach the last mile extension worker, even we need to find a platform. This is one of the platform where the outstanding professionals from different fields who are related to agriculture, directly, indirectly, they are invited to manage and their lifetime experience is shared, that is converted into a film and that will be shared with more than 1 lakh institutions and professionals across the globe. Through Manage YouTube channel, which has around 35,000 subscribers, we also try to reach our regular stakeholders. For your kind information, sir, we have just like SARD, we have Samitis, state level extension management training institutions. They also conduct large number of training programs. Sometimes they use these films as getting tools in their regular training programs. Today's topic is concerned, just to make a beginning, convergence opportunities for rural development and agriculture. We all know that India lives in villages and villages lives in agriculture. Unless agriculture and rural development are given importance, I think they play very critical role in nation building activities. Agriculture may contribute to less than 20% of our GDP, but it ensures 100% of food security to the entire population in the country. So we cannot ignore the agriculture sector also. Incidentally, agriculture ministry is called Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. This word welfare is the point of convergence here. What is welfare? Welfare is happiness, health and prosperity. That's called welfare. So the focus of our ministry is how to increase production, how to increase productivity, but how we can bring good health to the farmers, good prosperity to the farmers, good happiness to the farmers. So these things are not within the control of agriculture ministry. we are dealing something else, not covering every aspect of farmers' welfare. So our focus is more on crops rather than the person behind the crops. More less on farmers, more on the crops and production, productivity, profitability, those kind of issues. On the other hand, the farmer happiness, it can be brought if his health is good, his son and daughter get good education, if the village possesses a good road, approach road, if they possess a good vehicle and good house, good drinking water, good sanitation, and many more things like this. Probably all these aspects are covered by rural development discipline. Therefore, the full meaning of farmers' welfare can be incomplete if we ignore the discipline of rural development. Therefore, convergence between rural development and agriculture are very critical for agriculture development. With this brief introduction, I would like to introduce the esteemed speaker of today's program, Dr. Narendra Kumar ji is a very senior IAS officer from a 1989 batch, and currently he is in the secretary rank, working as a Director General of National Institute of Rural Development and Panchayat Raj, which is globally known, one of the oldest institution in the country, which is known world over. As IAS officer, Dr. Narendra Kumar ji served several disciplines like technical education, information technology, environment, industries, commerce, cooperation, agriculture, rural development, land and building, performance monitoring and evaluation, and many more. Recognizing his contribution, Golden Icon Award was awarded for ICT achievement for e-governance in education to Dr. Narendra Kumar sir. As he belongs to All India Service, he got a unique opportunity of serving several states. He is known in Pondicherry for developing hardware capital. He was instrumental in setting up four specialized universities in Delhi, and again in Pondicherry he introduced midday meals. That model is very popular, and also very unique activity which he initiated in Pondicherry is establishment of a biofertilizer project by converting polluting sugar mill and distillery waste into a useful biofertilizer. That is a very unique model which is appreciated everywhere. And Lordly, the Girl Child Protection Scheme of Delhi is also famous. He also implemented several national quality initiative as part of the performance management division of the cabinet secretariat, which is very critical for enhancing the efficiency of the systems, contributed to the setting up of GOI-wide performance management system in a short span of 6 months. A comparison is also given in a very advanced country like US. It takes nearly 3 years. That was achieved in 6 months within the country, and developed and implemented Delhi e-governance plan, National Code of Good Governance, Advanced Research Center in IIT in Health at IIT Delhi, introduced for the first time in the country an online pollution monitoring system for highly polluting units in Pondicherry. So this is his great contribution when he served different states. But as the DG of NIRD and PR, in a short span of time, initiated reforms like enhancing the vision from alleviation of poverty to quality of life at rural, launched SIRD grading system, initiated SIRDs. SIRDs means State Institute of Rural Development. They are the state level organizations of NIRDs as regional centers of excellence, standardization and strengthening of research for effective policy advocacy and capacity building, new models of urban clusters, framework for strengthening the transparency and capacity of NGOs, collaboration with national and international organizations like ICRISAT, SIPS, and reforms in the training calendar of NIRD, connecting SHG product with various e-commerce platforms, and regularization of training need assessment, and launching of 250 model gram panchayat clusters, activating school system and development of IT platforms for effective governance. He also served in several international organizations, like served as director country relations and business affairs at ICRISAT. He played very important role in south-south cooperation, and qualification wise, of course, number of qualifications he acquired, like PhD in chemistry from Osmania University, masters in biochemistry from IIT Delhi, master's degree in public administration from Maxwell School of Public Affairs, USA, and also a certificate course in information system and telecommunication management from Syracuse University, New York. With this brilliant academic and administrative experience, and also heading a globally known institute like National Institute of Rural Development and Panchayat Raj, he is today with us to share his lifetime experiences on this topic. Sir, on behalf of Managed Family, I would like to extend a warm welcome to you again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chandrasekharan. Also thank Dr. Renuka Rani for initiating the discussion. Esteemed faculty members, students of Manage, and others who are present here. My good fortune to be giving this Krishi Gyandeep knowledge lecture on a very important topic, rural development, agriculture, and the convergence opportunities between these two. I'd like to situate my talk today more of a conceptual plane rather than a rigorous data analytical based approach, because more and more I work in the government and outside, I see that the conceptual underpinnings of things which seem obvious are sometimes faulty, and because of that we don't end up in the places in which we intend to end up or desire to end up. So towards this end, first an understanding of rural development, then move to a little bit of agriculture, then look at the ways in which these two can converge potentially, and what is happening on the ground today, and what can be done to bring about better convergence between agriculture and rural development. That will be the outline of my talk today. First, an understanding of rural areas. So, there is no universal definition of what are rural areas. That's the first thing that we need to realize. The simple thing, as they talk about in Indian philosophy, that look, what is a very abstruse concept, they say this is not this, this is not it, this is not it. And finally, whatever is not the residual becomes the philosophical concept that they're talking about. Similarly, in rural areas, whatever is not urban is a rural area. That is the simple definition that we follow. So, urban areas are defined. So, whatever is not an urban area is a rural area. So, what are urban areas? Urban areas are those which have approximately 5,000 or more population. They have a particular population density about 400 persons per square kilometer. And approximately the male population engaged in non-agricultural pursuit is more than 75%. So these are some typical bases on which an urban area is defined. So whatever is not an urban area is a rural area. That's a simple definition. The another concept that we talk about is development. What is development? That is something that, again, there is a confusion that goes on to say that what is development? Development seems to be growth, moving forward, progressing, which is epitomized, symbolized by growth. So typically when we talk about growth, we cannot diverse that growth from an economic growth. So there has to be, again, a clear distinction between development and growth. economic growth. What is the essential difference between economic growth and development is again something that we need to clearly comprehend. When we talk about economic growth, basically we're talking about the numbers that the economy is growing at such and such rate. Similarly, the rural economy also we can compute to say it's growing at such and such rate. But when talking about the growth rate, we are not essentially talking about how that growth is distributed. Whether all sections of society, the rural areas, are they benefiting equally from that growth is something that we are not concerned with. But when we're talking about development, we're talking about economic growth and equitable distribution of the fruits of that economic growth. So that's the essential difference when we're talking about development vis-a-vis economic growth. So that's what we're talking therefore about rural areas, economic growth which is distributed in an equitable manner or with equitable access to people living in the rural areas. Another key feature that most people all over the world know, it's an obvious thing, but I state it for completeness sake. So what are rural areas associated with? So they are associated with remoteness. They are associated with lack of services and facilities, such as education facilities are not as strong as they are in urban areas. Health facilities are not as strong as they are in urban areas, and so on. Now we turn to agriculture. So what do we mean by agriculture? Agriculture for development. So when we talk about agriculture, what are we really talking about? We're talking about the primary sector of the economy, primary, secondary, tertiary sectors of the economy. Sector of the economy which deals with farming, forestry, and so on. So this is the primary sector of the economy. There are certain characteristics of agriculture, which all of you are aware. So what are the typical characteristics of agriculture in the rural areas or for the rural areas? One, as we all know, they provide food security. Food security not only for themselves, but also for those living in urban areas, which is again an obvious thing. Another thing that the agriculture does to the rural populace is to give price stability to the food that they consume. They consume food which is available at reasonable prices because they produce it. Obviously, exporting to the urban areas comes next. First, they consume. The subsistence agriculture comes first. So, price stability can be well stabilized in the rural areas from agriculture. The second key aspect of agriculture in rural areas, villages live on agriculture. So, people in rural areas substantially depend upon agriculture for employment. Substantially. That's important to note. The third important key characteristics of agriculture, government interface with agriculture. Government has a significant presence in agriculture. Before we turn to that, we should people live on agriculture very substantially in the rural areas. But is that picture stable? Is it changing? Is something that we need to think of. So typically, people living in urban areas look at rural areas as places which are full with lush green fields. People are farming, living in the rural areas only on farming or substantially on farming. Is that the true picture of the rural economy today? Something that we need to comprehend. There are studies which were done by Dr. Ramesh Chand, member of the Planning Commission, and by the CSO, the Central Statistical Office figures, which go to show the non-farm contribution of villages today is more than 60%. Ramesh Chand's estimates are 66%. 2/3 of the village economy, rural economy is non-farm, is not farm. So substantial part of the rural economy is therefore non-farm driven and non-farm contributing, which is something that we need to take cognizance of and accordingly evolve our strategies. That's what I'm talking about, that we are not clear about the concepts which are currently prevailing. So when we talk about the non-farm aspect of the economy, then we're to see what is the role of technology in the rural areas and in the urban areas, and why government becomes important for rural areas and for agriculture. One, as I mentioned, that government becomes important for price stabilization, which is one important function of agriculture. Second, creation of employment avenues for the agriculturalists. A third important aspect is technology infusion for agriculture. Agriculture has to essentially be driven by its own technology, by technology which is grown domestically. You cannot be importing technology from Europe or America and implanting it into the Indian situation and expect the Indian agricultural growth to be run out of it, because the physical situations are different, the climatic situations are different, because of the differences in agroclimatic situations, because of the biological differences in the varieties and crops that are grown. We have to have homegrown technology to drive agricultural growth. And adoption of that technology becomes significantly important in agriculture, not so much in the non-farm sector. Urban areas are driven substantially by the non-farm component of the economy. There it's possible to import technology and implant it in urban areas and drive growth based on that. But not so much the agriculture domain has to essentially be driven by technology which is indigenously developed. Only then it would be substantially be useful. As I was mentioning that, look, this change in the farm and non-farm composition of the rural economy has changed substantially. And it changes substantially. This is the theory for a less developed country or to a middle income country to a developed country. Typically, for a low income country, a developing country, the composition of agriculture in the rural economy in particular is upwards of 50%. Slowly, when the overall income rises, it becomes a middle income country. The contribution of farm income to the rural economy declines substantially to somewhere between 15 to 20%, and that's where India is situated today. And further, when the movement takes place forward to go towards a developed country, typically developed countries have agriculture contribution order of about 2 to 5%. So, typically we see that there is a decline in the farm contribution to the rural economy. As Dr. Chandrasekhara was mentioning, that agriculture should not be written off. It's important. It has to be taken into consideration substantially for the rural development and for the rural areas to thrive. Because is that the importance of agriculture is declining because less efforts are being put into agriculture, or because other areas are doing better than agriculture? Something again we have to understand the inherent characteristic of agriculture. The inherent characteristic of agriculture is that there is good agriculture growth. In India, we've seen good agriculture growth. It's been a very great success story from a begging bowl where India went around the Western countries, US and others, with a begging bowl asking for food grains in the 1965 or so. Today, we are a food surplus country exporting food, and we are the third largest exporter of food grains in the world. It's been a success story in agriculture. Despite that success story, is it right to situate agriculture to say that, look, agricultural importance is declining in terms of the overall farm contribution to the rural economy? This is again a reality. What exactly could be happening here is something to understand. When agriculture growth takes place, there is greater disposable income in the hands of the farmers, in the hands of the agriculturalists. What do they do with that income? They invest. And where do they invest? They typically invest in non-farm activities. They typically invest in constructing a house, in buying some assets in the house, educating their children, trying to get better health services for the children, and so on. So, success in agricultural areas leads to a spurring of increase in the non-farm activities. By its very nature, agriculture success leads to increase in the non-farm activities. That does not mean that agriculture has not done well. The very fact that non-farm contribution to rural economy is increasing means that agriculture has done well. But what is the transformation that we've seen in this country? Has it been uniform? Because again, theoretical constructs, Rostow's growth stages, as they call. Rostow's growth stages for an economy, it talks about graduation of a primary economy into a secondary economy into a services-led economy. What happened in India is something noteworthy, again, in the context of rural areas. That for quite a long time, we have been a primary sector-driven economy, focusing on farm activities, forestry, and so on. Suddenly, there was a spike in the economic activity. And that spike in economic activity was driven substantially by services growth. So, contrary to normal growth stages world over, for a developing country to evolve, growing gradually from a primary sector economy to secondary to a services-led economy, we jumped from a primary sector economy to a tertiary services-driven economy. So what did that mean? That meant substantially that, look, the development aspect, equity aspect of the development got subjugated very substantially. Only a small segment sliver of people benefit substantially from the services-led growth. A large mass of people, such as in rural areas, etc., did not benefit so much from that. So that growth, that development was not so inclusive because we jumped from a primary sector economy to a services-led economy. And there are limits to that jump, that we moved primarily from agriculture into an IT-driven economy, into a services-driven economy. Whereas there are other countries which have moved gradually, such as China, moved from agricultural economy to manufacturing economy, from there moving on to services-led economy. That transition is still happening, but we jumped that manufacturing economy and moved forward. So as I was mentioning, the distribution of the fruits of that economic growth, that spike in economic activity, were not felt by the rural masses or a substantial number of people. And that can mean that economic growth may not be sustainable in the long run. Today, the IT sector is also knocked by various threats, various waves. Time to time, things keep changing in the IT sector. Every now and then, a new technology breaks on the anvil and it moves. The latest people are talking about is the AI, the artificial intelligence, which talks about changing the entire paradigm of the IT. People learned substantially programming and so on and so forth. All those are going to be outdated because machines are going to take care of that. So if one such wave washes out this entire jump to prosperity, services-driven prosperity, we're again going to be back with the primary sector of the economy, dealing with the farm and farmers. If we have to insulate ourselves against such kind of eventualities, we have to grow gradually, we have to have a balanced growth and balanced development. Balanced development will be development which not only focuses on the services sector and the primary sector, but also has a substantially strong base in the secondary sector, manufacturing and so on. And that's what the government is trying to do. After several decades, then they're correcting the course to say that manufacture in India, make in India is the new paradigm. That we're talking about moving from the farm-based economies to the manufacturing-based economy and then strengthen our services-based economy. As I mentioned, concepts are quite often lost sight of. This very simple thing that, look, there are roster stages, you need to move from a primary sector to a secondary sector to a tertiary sector, was lost sight of by big intellectuals in this country, started jumping from the primary sector economy to the tertiary sector of the economy. Then you realize that, look, this jump is not sustainable. We have to also strengthen our manufacturing base, our secondary sector of the economy. So conceptual clarity is absolutely necessary. You need to have a clear understanding. And in this, there are again a lot of opportunities for growth of the rural areas, growth of the agricultural sector. As I mentioned, surpluses are being generated in the agriculture sector because of the faster growth of the agriculture sector. There's a transformation in the agriculture sector. Typically, the transformation again has to happen rural to manufacturing, farm to manufacturing to the services-based economy. But even in moving from a farm-based economy to a manufacturing-based economy, what really happens that there are surpluses generated in the farm sector, such as through green revolution, through various technology infusion, intensification of production, and so on. Surpluses are generated. Those surpluses, as I mentioned, are applied in non-farm activities. Typical outlook would be to make investments for any farmer in getting a good house, getting facilities for that house, educating the children, taking care of the health of parents, others, and so on and so forth. Beyond that, if they start making more money, what do? They start putting money in urban areas. So there is a movement of capital from the rural areas into urban areas. So is that good for the rural economy? Does that benefit the rural development very substantially? Is again something that we need to think of. If that's not good, are there ways in which we can retain that surplus which is generated from agricultural activities in rural areas to further propel growth in the rural areas? Something that we need to think through. For that, we need to come with a new paradigm for investment, for growth of the rural areas, that surpluses from agriculture are retained in rural areas rather than moved to urban areas. So we need to have a new organizing principle in terms of setting up enterprises, setting up various startups to be able to leverage on the surpluses being generated from agricultural activities in rural areas. Another key aspect that we need to be cognizant about within agriculture when we talk about transformation, that what is the productivity growth of cereals compared to the animal husbandry and horticulture. That, as we all know, when economic transformation takes place, when movement happens from the primary sector economy to the secondary sector economy and tertiary, when there's a move away from agriculture, from a farm-based economy, typically the contribution of animal husbandry and horticulture increases very substantially in comparison to the cereals. The growth rate of cereals becomes much smaller compared to the growth rate of the animal husbandry and horticulture. Typically, cereals grow about 3.3% or so, whereas the animal husbandry and horticulture grow about 4 to 6%. Much higher rate of growth is witnessed in animal husbandry and horticulture, and that's the transformation we're going through. That increase in the economic growth in animal husbandry and horticulture. So how do we leverage on that as well to be able to drive the economic growth of rural areas, to be able to set up enterprises in rural areas, drawing upon the surpluses from agricultural income? So broadly speaking, again, this is the strategy, and the right strategy of the government of India now is to move from agriculture to agribusinesses. So that's the organizing paradigm that we're looking at, moving from agriculture to agribusinesses. How do we do that? Typically, we do this through various contract farming arrangements. We do this through setting up of farmer producer organizations. Farmer producer organizations are good at aggregating inputs, aggregating the marketable produce and marketing them. So they leverage on the strength of aggregation. Through aggregation, we're able to reduce the cost of the inputs, we're able to increase the marketability of the produce. So this is the organizing principles, setting up the FPOs. Likewise, we need to create various storage infrastructure so we can avoid wastages on the way, transportation wastages and so on. So all these systems move us from agriculture-based economy to an agribusiness-driven economy. And that's what I think we should be focusing on. So as I said, that look, we've been successful in the agriculture domain, moving from a begging bowl situation in the 60s to a food surplus economy, a net exporter of food grains. But is that advantage there for us for all time to come? Is there something, a done deal, that we don't have to focus on that anymore? Is something that we need to think about. And here comes two important concerns I think we need to be cognizant of, rather three. One, we are faced with climate change, and we cannot avoid that, we cannot forget it. what are the impacts of climate change for agriculture is something that we need to be cognizant of. So would it be business as usual with agriculture? Is there going to be a dwindling of the yields? If we don't sufficiently adapt ourselves to climate change is something that we need to be concerned with. Estimates are what by 2050 we need to have 400 million tons of food grains produced. Are we able to produce them successfully and in the right quantities for the right produce that is required is something to think about. So that calls for urgent action on adaptation to climate change, without which again we may go to a food starved situation as is happening with some countries in Africa and so on. Other key aspect that we need to focus on, the nature of agricultural growth is what's happening is, yes, we are able to produce a lot of cereals. As I mentioned, the cereal growth rate in India is about, I think, 77% or so. Area under horticulture and other areas, the contribution is about 19%. But substantial growth is happening on the horticulture as well as on the animal husbandry side. Even with the whatever low value cereals are being produced, the key aspect to look at is, are they health reinforcing? Do they give the desired benefits to the populace is something to look at. So we see that, look, the cereals perhaps are not the best way of sustaining the individuals. This is the conclusion people are coming to. We look at promotion of millets in such a big way. They are healthy foods, food of the poor, which is forgotten. And now it's a rage with the rich. So people are increasingly taking to the poor man's food, millets of the past. And the poor man doesn't get the millets anymore. They're so expensive now. So how do we make that available to the poor? How do we take their food back to the poor is something that we should be concerned with. Again, when we talk about nutritive food and improving nutritional outcomes of agriculture, that requires a different organizing paradigm we need to think about, such as promoting healthy foods, such as promoting foods like millet and so on. Also concerned with that is a new organizing principle. It's not enough just to feed people, but we have to provide them with the adjacent services. By adjacent services, I mean to say that we have to provide them with good healthcare facilities. We need to educate them on the importance of consuming nutritious food. Only when this situation is there, when we are able to provide all the other requisites such as a healthy environment and an educative environment, are people able to utilize the benefits of nutritive food. So with nutrition have to go other factors. And that's where the importance of rural development comes in. Rural development typically assumes two different approaches. One, we call it as a broad rural development policy and a narrow rural development policy. The broad rural development policy deals with improving the overall picture in the rural areas, such as reinforcing health, education, equitable access to various services, and so on and so forth. The narrow rural development, as we define in this country and many other countries also, focuses substantially on reducing poverty alleviation programs, dealing with the deprivations of the rural populace, and so on. And that's where we need to understand, why do we at all need rural development? Why do we at all need agriculture? So agriculture, as I mentioned, few characteristics are that they give price stability, they give food grains, they create employment opportunities, and so on and so forth. Then why rural development is something that we need to be concerned with. So there have to be measures to deal with the welfare of the people living in rural areas, because they are deprived. They suffer various deprivations, socioeconomic deprivations, deprivations in services, and so on and so forth. That's one aspect of it. Other key aspect is that, look, if we don't deal with the rural areas, if we don't effectively stem the migration of rural population to urban areas, there will be ghettos, there will be big slums in the urban areas, there will be huge pressures on the urban areas. The urban areas will not be able to cope with the pressure of migration from the rural areas, and the urban areas themselves will become uncompetitive. Too many people cluttering the urban areas, not enough jobs. So neither people get lost, between the rural and urban areas. So that's something that we want to reduce the pressures in the urban areas. At the same time, but realize that the socio-economic milieu of life in rural areas is much better, much more comfortable. Quality of life in general in rural areas is better. So how do we reinforce that is another aspect that we are concerned with. A third important aspect is that look, developing countries like India and China, they are able to grow well, they are able to do better than many developed countries because we have a catch up to do. We were at the bottom and we are growing. Since we are at the bottom, we are able to grow faster and we are able to catch up. Because you are so far down, it's easier for you to keep coming up. For somebody who is situated here, for him to move, it will be much more difficult. So the growth rate is much faster for developing countries in comparison to developed countries. The same analogy holds good for rural areas also. Rural areas typically are disadvantaged, challenged, remote areas, lower on development profile. In comparison to urban areas, opportunities for growth, opportunities for development are much more in rural areas. They hold out much more potential, provided we organize ourselves well to deal with the potentialities of the rural areas. This is the importance of rural areas and rural development that I thought I'll flag to you. But there is a certain degree of confusion which prevails again between rural development work and agriculture. Literature is replete with instances which say that look, what is one most important contribution of agriculture to rural areas? Literature is replete to say that agriculture is one of the major contributors for poverty alleviation. Again, here in rural development programs, in the narrow sense that we talk about organizing it in terms of increasing employment, infusing incomes into the rural areas, we are again talking about poverty alleviation. So which of the two is a better driver for poverty alleviation, for reducing poverty, is an important thing that we need to think about. As I mentioned, the current rural situation is that look, there is substantial increase in the non-farm income. The non-farm income, as estimates, is more than 60% of the total rural economy is non-farm income today. But in comparison to that, we look at the rural industrialization, how much of rural industrialization has taken place, how much of alternative sources of income have developed in rural areas. We find it is negligible, it's very little. Even though Mahatma Gandhi more than 100 years said that look, he would like to see self-sufficient villages which are vibrant with rural industries, but hardly any rural industrialization has taken place in more than 100 years of his saying. So as I was mentioning, we need to find ways of utilizing the new paradigms of growth in the rural areas and taking the country's growth through forward movement in the rural areas. Another significant aspect of rural areas is the connectivity. One of the key characteristics of rural areas, as mentioned to you all over the world, is the remoteness of the rural areas. They are far-flung places, difficult to reach, no road, no facilities. This is the typical conception. But what is the current situation in the country today? The country ran a very successful program called the Prime Minister's Gram Sadak Yojana. And with that, almost every village of this country is connected with a motorable, accessible road. So that's the current situation compared to our conception. That's what I'm saying, that we need to have conceptual clarity. There are cobwebs in our mind that rural areas are remote, inaccessible, and not having facilities and so on. Compared to that, now today almost every village in the country is connected with a good motorable road. Are we making use of those roads effectively? Are we able to transport the agricultural goods effectively? Are we able to use that infrastructure effectively for new production paradigm? Something to think about. But the basic infrastructure has been made. Typically what we find is roads are laid, but there is no public transportation facility on that. There are monopolies with respect to private transport which are created, which run on those roads. One transporter or a few transporters, a monopoly or oligopoly operates on these roads. Because of that, the villages and agriculturists don't get the kind of benefits that they ought to get. There are opportunities again around that. Another key aspect that we need to be cognizant about is the institutional arrangements in rural areas. What are the institutional arrangements in rural areas? I'm not talking about at the government level, at the secretariat, or not even at the district level. But let's say at the village level and panchayat, what are the new institutional structures which have come up? One is the government servants like myself, government officers who keep pestering people. Other than that, there are two important institutional structures, community-driven institutional structures which have come up in rural areas. One such community-driven institutional structure is that of the self-help groups. There are today 88 lakh self-help groups in this country, and more than 10 crore women associated with these self-help groups, which, as you know, are saving and thrift societies. The women save among themselves, lend to each other, and using their savings, leverage loans from the banks. So that way, availability of rural credit and rural credit-based problems have significantly been reduced by the self-help group movement. Additionally, they also partake in various other development activities, such as identifying beneficiaries in various planning exercises, motivating people, enhancing awareness, and so on and so forth. So self-help groups is one important institutional arrangement which has come to be in rural areas and which cannot be neglected or ignored. Another key institutional arrangement which has been there in the country right from independence, which has undergone changes all along the path, is that of the Panchayati Raj institutions. As you all know, the three-tier panchayatis in the country, the Gram Panchayati, the block level Panchayati, and the district Panchayati. They've been there right since independence. But compare this with the situation in other countries, developed countries abroad. We have this three-tier government, just as we have a three-tier government, some developed countries such as USA have a three-tier government. The federal government, we call central government, then the state government and the local government. A typical poll, an interview of people in a developed country, you go and ask a citizen in a developed country that, look, which government do you think is most important? Is the federal government, the state government, or the local government that's most important to you? That citizen typically in a developed country typically responds to say, it's the local government which is most important to me. Because it impacts that person's day-to-day life. The school districts, the school system, schooling systems, etc., and the permissions that they need to take for vehicle operation and so on, everything comes from the local government. And the local government's presence also substantially contributes to development, contributes to welfare. Because the theory again, the concept is that the local governments understand the local needs. They understand the local choices people make, and provide services according to the choice requirements of the citizens in rural areas. In our country, we have the local governments which were strengthened as the third tier of government with the constitutional amendments, 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments in the country, when we rechristened them from Panchayati Raj institutions to local governments. But nevertheless, there are three important devolutions that we talk about with respect to these local governments, Panchayati Raj institutions: devolution of funds, functionaries, and functions. Even though 29 functions are expected to be devolved to these local governments, the Panchayati Raj institutions, most state governments have only devolved them on paper. There is no actual devolution of these functions, functionaries, and finances to the Panchayati Raj institutions, to the local government. So what does that affect? How does it affect things? That affects services to the people in a manner which is not according to their choices, which is not according to the local potentiality. As a result, growth in rural areas, growth lags behind because actions taken by the governments are not in sync with the local requirements. So that therefore is something, a crying need, which has been there for a substantial period of time, at least for 30 years since the constitutional amendment has come about, but that again needs to be significantly be reinforced. So these are two important institutional arrangements in rural areas that we need to be cognizant about, which is the self-help groups and the Panchayati Raj institution. And their vibrant presence is very significant and necessary for the rural areas to do well and for effective investment of the surpluses from the farm activities into non-farm activities that will spur the growth of the rural areas and through that spur the growth of the country. Here now I turn to what I was mentioning as the broad and narrow rural development policies. They were mentioning broad rural development policies deal with the overall situation, overall quality of life of people in rural areas, such as health, education, such as various Anganwadi services, and so on and so forth. We are going through an interesting and important program called the Aspirational Blocks program, of which Dr. Chandrasekhara was good enough to contribute, and we're working out with the aspirational blocks. By aspirational blocks, we mean to say those blocks which are lagging behind, those blocks which are really challenged in terms of remoteness, in terms of lack of resources, in terms of lack of motivation in people, and so on, because of which these blocks are lagging behind. They are not doing as well as other blocks in the district, and obviously not as well as other areas in the state. So since these blocks lag behind, the entire country's growth lags behind. The country can go much faster if these blocks were to have moved forward, if they were to have moved faster. So that's the effort with the Aspirational Blocks program. The Niti Aayog has developed about 40 different indicators focused in various themes, about 9 different themes and 9 different sectors. In a focused manner, the effort here is how can we make progress on these 9 themes and 40 indicators of that. For instance, in agriculture, how can we ensure effective distribution of soil health card? For animal husbandry, how can we provide effective vaccination? How can we ensure groundwater quality is not damaged, and so on and so forth. Like that, very focused indicators, taking steps in a concrete manner, in a time-bound manner to achieve results on the Aspirational Blocks program is one approach to the broad rural development policies implementation. This approach extends, as I mentioned, health, education, and so on. Now I turn to the bulk of our work. A bulk of our work is on taking forward the narrow rural development policies. Narrow rural development policies primarily deal with what we call as poverty alleviation programs. That's where again the question is out for us to answer. Is agriculture an important contributor for poverty alleviation, or these so-called rural development programs are a significant contributor to the alleviation of poverty in the country? So some such schemes are what we call as the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which guarantees about 100 days of employment, which is the convergence between agriculture and the rural development programs. The one such program is what is called as the MG-NREGA, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. The sum total of the allocation of funds for all the rural development programs, including the MG-NREGA, is very substantial. About 1,20,000 crores every year on the rural development programs themselves, almost similar to the Agriculture Ministry's budget. Along with that, we have the Panchayat Raj Ministry's budget, state government budget. Together is more than 2 lakh crore rupees of investment goes into these programs in the rural areas. So we'll see how effective they are, how we can leverage on these to promote agricultural growth or grow rural areas from surpluses from the farm activities. NREGA program typically talks about providing 100 days of employment, guaranteed employment to every household in the rural area. Whoever seeks work needs to be provided that work. And allocation is substantial, upwards of about 72,000, 80,000 crore rupees is the investment for the MG-NREGA program. But if we look at the outcomes of the MG-NREGA program, they are startling. The MG-NREGA program is typically what is called as a wage employment program. And anyone who seeks work will be given work. That looks very nice on the face of it to say, anyone who says, I need work, I'll give you work, fine. So nobody will be denied that work. So it looks very nice and jazzy and excellent. But dig deeper into it and see what's been the impact of NREGA on poverty alleviation. Something very startling and significant comes out. There have been studies which have gone to show that NREGA works have contributed to 8% incremental income, only 8% incremental income for an MG-NREGA beneficiary. So is 8% incremental income enough to pull that person out of poverty, or how many years will it take to pull that person out of poverty is a key thing that we need to focus on. My guess is very, very few people who are really at the edge of the poverty line can climb over the poverty line and get off it. Majority of beneficiaries of MG-NREGA will continue to be in poverty. They will have to be given doles on a continuing basis. So that's where we should think, as I was mentioning, Are they significantly contributing to poverty alleviation? Is agriculture contributing to poverty alleviation? Something to think about. In NAREGA, in addition to creating employment, what it tries to do, and that's where the convergence with agriculture comes, is it attempts to create a number of assets, and it talks about creating productive assets. Again, there's a big challenge on this to say whether the assets created under the NREGA program, are they really productive or are they not less productive? Typically, people talk about an unplanned way in which the NREGA works are taken forward. Various activities, assets are planned. Sometimes they plan, replan that same thing, same activities such as deepening a pond takes place multiple times. So that's where agricultural convergence can take place very, very substantially, converging with the MG Narega asset creation part. How can we create, let us say, threshing sheds? How can we create the workspaces for self-help groups or micro enterprises of self-help groups is something that we need to work on. There have been recommendations to say that MG Narega works can be used for fisheries sector. How can you deepen the ponds? How can we reinforce the ponds? So that's some activity which can be productively be taken forward. Another key aspect here is that, as I was mentioning, when we are transitioning the agricultural economy, moving towards a developed country status, the growth, relative growth in the animal husbandry and horticulture sector is much higher compared to the growth in the cereals component. So, taking a cue from this, again, convergence opportunities are substantially there. Can be organized small dairy units at the village level, getting a group of beneficiaries from the NRLM self-help groups to get group of animals. Then the milk produced there is tested, collected, again it is aggregated at a dairy unit level. And again through that spur the entire micro enterprise activity. So that's another thing that we need to focus on. So infrastructure creation under MG Narega for agricultural activities. Of course, there are various other things about Narega that I'm not talking about, that we can have a village plan for Narega and so on and so forth. But these are some opportunities that the Narega provides for effective convergence between Narega and agriculture. At the same time, there is a substantial lot that the MG Narega, it's not that it's only that rural development we learn and we try to converge with rural development and move with it. But there is a substantial whole lot that MG Narega can learn from agriculture. And that's what we are trying to foster in the rural development programs also. Substantial number of programs and major amount of investment in the Narega program go towards natural resource management works. But unfortunately, the approaches in those natural resource management works are not very rigorous, not very systematic, because they're done with the people, they're done with the community institutions, not by experts. They are not very rigorous. So here we are recommended and would like to say that there's a lot for the Narega works, natural resource management component of it, to learn significantly from agriculture, such as watershed development works, various natural resource management works taken up under agriculture. Learn from that, make the outputs of the Narega natural resource management works much more productive, much more useful. A second program of convergence, what we call as the National Rural Livelihood Mission, through which 88 lakh self-help groups have been set up in the country. About 10 crore women are associated with this. As I was mentioning, the original conception, as with most rural development programs, is poverty alleviation. So they said that, look, what is the objective of the NRLM setting up the self-help groups? They said poverty alleviation. We want to do poverty alleviation. Whatever rural development ministry says, poverty alleviation. What are they trying to do? As I mentioned, is a saving and thrift activity that they save money, small lots, whatever they can save, 10 rupees, 20 rupees. The women save, pool that up, and they have a reasonably good accounting system, and a lot of it driven by capacity building activities. The women are taught how they will save that money, how they will keep accounts for it, how they will keep the proceedings book, so that the entire operation is transparent. So that's been quite successful. These 88 lakh self-help groups, they've been able to save substantial amount of money, lent that money among themselves very substantially. Because of that, what have been the benefits? The benefits have been that women are able to save among themselves the small little money from time to time, lend to themselves. So the nuisance of that money lender is very substantially reduced. That's been one important gain and benefit from the self-help group movement. Another gain has been that, look, they have such significant amount of money for consumption needs, for investment needs. Typically, investments have been on various business activities, setting up small shops, and so on and so forth. Sometimes an educational loan to educate the child, and so on. But in this whole paradigm of saving and thrift lending to themselves, where is poverty alleviation coming? That's a significant question that need to be asked. That was the initial paradigm that looked poverty alleviation. Even at that point in time, 2004, I remember very well that I made a trip here to Telangana and Andhra with a World Bank team, a World Bank immersion on the NRLM activities in the self-help movement. The very same question I asked at that point in time. They said that, they asked them that, look, where is poverty alleviation in this? Is this program really going to contribute to poverty alleviation? Yeah, this is the beginning. Yes, it's going to contribute to poverty alleviation, and so on and so forth. And went on, and I kept questioning this, and whatever fora that I was, is it really contributing to poverty alleviation? The NRLM mission was something which was driven substantially by the World Bank, setting up the self-help groups in Telangana, Andhra is called Velugu, other places in different names it was called. Lo and behold, last year, they put out a report, the World Bank put out a report to say that, look, saving and thrift activities are okay with the self-help groups, but its contribution to poverty alleviation had been negligible. It had been done nothing. So what's the moral of the story? The moral of the story is that, look, we should not be blown away by these World Banks, by the UNDPs and others. They cannot think for us. We have to think for ourselves. We have to think what is good for us, think carefully, and take them to good implemental programs and implement them effectively. Just because there are some big names, we should not be blown away by those big names. But discovering this, I must appreciate the current government's efforts. They've said that, look, saving and thrift activity is not enough for this huge institutional structure of 88 lakh self-help groups, 10 crore women associated with this. Now, after about 20 years, they said, look, the program's focus has to move towards income generation, formation of micro enterprises. And that's where the government is now focusing on. The Prime Minister announced in the Independence Day speech, also the President announced that we are going to have 3 crore micro enterprises. Now the challenge is, from a place where you were nowhere, suddenly you have to jump to 3 crore micro enterprises. And organizing those 3 crore micro enterprises, educating everyone, looking at the business opportunities for them, creating a business case for them, and then aggregating the inputs and the marketable produce and so on, huge amount of challenge. So that's again a big opportunity again for convergence between the farm sector and the rural development. As I mentioned, 3 crore micro enterprises they want to set up. So how much we can contribute, collaborate to make these 3 crore micro enterprises successful is a key aspect that we want to look at, we should be focusing on. Not only for the agriculture sector, for the growth of the rural areas and for the growth of the country. Because if we grow the rural areas enough, the country's growth is faster. Just like we talk about the aspirational blocks, which are lagging behind blocks, the rural areas are also lagging behind. And therefore provide an opportunity for growth. If we leverage on that opportunity through these micro enterprises and we make them successful, the rural areas grow, and with the growth of the rural areas, the country leaps forward. Another important convergence opportunity is what we call as the DDU-GKY, is that the DDU-GKY, Deen Dayal Upadhyay Gramin Kaushalya Yojana, is a skilling program. It's a parallel in the other skilling ministry called as the PMKVY, Prime Minister Kaushalya Vikas Yojana. Compared to that, we have a DDU-GKY, Deen Dayal Upadhyay Gramin Kaushalya Yojana. So what we do typically in this is take people from the rural areas, rural youth, who couldn't do so well in school or have done well in school but don't have employment opportunities in the rural areas, take them to a center, a skilling center typically located in an urban area under something called a project implementation agency. NIRD is a major central technical support agency for this whole program. We monitor the program's implementation in about 20 states all over the country. So typically a rural youth, based on his aptitude, judging his aptitude and so on, after some counseling, is taken to a skilling center in an urban area where that person undergoes training, typically for about 3 months or so. After that 3 months, the success of the program is that the candidates are placed with various business organizations such as a mall, such as a hotel, and so on. They get some jobs with which they survive. But what happens in this whole transition from rural to urban is the person gets a job because the whole program is placement linked. About 70% of the candidates necessarily have to be placed by the PIA, by the center. Candidates get placed. But look at what salaries they get. They get salaries about 10 to 15,000. So is that enough for that rural youth to survive in an urban area? So to pay the rent, to pay for his transportation, maybe to pay for his family, is just not adequate. As a result, what happens? A lot of these rural youth come back and fall back into the rural areas, not being able to cope with the pressures of the urban areas. So can we create alternative job opportunities for them in the rural areas through micro enterprises, through various startups that we can set up in rural areas is something to think about. So basically what we're looking at is, I think there's a scope for healthy integration between the agriculture sector and the rural development. There have been various paradigms of rural development called by the name of integrated rural development. But I must say, nobody clearly understands what they mean by integrated rural development. Somebody talks about bringing all the stakeholders together. Somebody talks about equitable distribution of the benefits of rural development to everyone, and so on. But what we are actively and aggressively to be looking forward to is a good integration between the agriculture sector and the rural development with a clear conceptus on which one contributes more to poverty alleviation, which one is a driver for economic growth in rural areas. I think that's integration is something that we need to look at. Other key aspect that we need to be focusing on, as I mentioned, that we are now on the anvil of spinning out 3 crore micro enterprises in rural areas, backward people, with people with limited capacities, to bring them face to face with business opportunities and make them successful in them, supplying the entire ecosystem. Huge challenge, because as you know, for any enterprise or entrepreneurship, there's the valley of death. And we don't want major number of these 3 crore micro enterprises to collapse in this valley of death. And that's where we need to give them a lot of innovative ideas, lot of innovative practices, lot of energy to make this huge number of micro enterprises and startups which can utilize surpluses from the farm sector to drive the growth in these enterprises. That's an area where we need innovation. And when we talk of innovation, innovation, as you all know, is not only technology, it's organizing things differently, doing things differently, even in a traditional mode. But along with that comes technology. I was talking about the PMGSY and rural roads which have been laid connecting every village in the country. Alongside, we also see a digital revolution. Almost every village in the country today is connected with mobile networks, with optical fiber networks under Bharat broadband network. Now almost about 70% of the villages of the country are connected with Bharat broadband network. So connectivity is not a problem for rural areas. So one key aspect we have to recognize is what is the differentiator between developed countries and developing countries. Why is it that they have grown fast, and why is it that they continue to grow fast even in the agriculture sector where productivity gaps are quite high, yield gaps are high. So what are the reasons why the yield gaps are high? One, as I was mentioning, is that we need to have effective technologies, effective varieties, practices developed, and those practices need to be effectively be implemented in the farmer's field. If they don't happen, well, we continue to see those yield gaps which other countries don't see. So technology is a key driver for and differentiator between developed countries and developing countries. Reason, technology is additive in its value. Typical example is the varietal development in agriculture. We develop a new variety and we hybridize it, we cross it with another local variety with some superior qualities. We get a better variety. You cross that better variety with another, you get even better variety. So technology is additive in its nature, is incremental in its improvement. Same is what is called as a Moore's law. Moore's law talks about compressing the number of transistors and semiconductors onto a chip. Every year, that number keeps on increasing through innovation, through better technology adoption, better technology practices. And the cost of compressing and putting that many chips on a particular given space, that keeps on decreasing and decreases exponentially. With that decrease in exponential cost of technology, there is an exponential growth in the economic growth rate. And that's what we can accomplish by active adoption of technology. So along with innovation in rural areas, we also have to see active adoption of technology. And that's what we're looking at. Even in the NIRD, we have a strong collaboration with the IIT Madras Research Park. We're looking at transforming our rural technology park into a startup park, how we can bring in technology-driven enterprises into rural areas, such as rural annotation centers and such like other things based on various models. That's something that we're trying to look at. So integration between agriculture and rural development is one area. Innovation and technology is another driver, and for convergence and collaboration in agriculture and rural development. Other key thing that I was mentioning about is the institutional strengthening. We need to not only strengthen the self-help groups movement, but we also substantially need to strengthen the Panchayati Raj institutions. All Panchayati Raj institutions, as I was mentioning, 29 subjects are devolved to the panchayats, including agriculture in many states. But they remain on paper. And the Panchayati Raj institutions, including Gram Panchayatis, have a standing committee to deal with agriculture. But there is hardly any linkage between the agriculture and the Panchayati Raj institutions. Standing committees hardly meet ever and contribute ever to agriculture growth development in the rural areas. So institutional strengthening is another important aspect that we need to bring about. So I would like to summarize. This is what I would like to say, that look, convergence opportunities are across economic integration between rural development and agriculture, innovation and technology, institutional strengthening. So these are ways in which I think we can effectively foster convergence between rural development and agriculture to be able to drive economic growth in rural areas, and through driving economic growth.
Now I request our Director General to give us valuable remarks, please.
Wonderful talk on convergence between rural development and agriculture. Of course, you took us to the sky and gave a eagle view of what is happening at the ground level and what all the problems are there and how we can manage these problems. Of course, one wonderful statement which I can recall here is Indian problems, Indian solutions. Our problems we have to solve. Rural problems, rural solutions. We should not look at any other sector. Why it is happening there, their context, ecosystem is entirely different. So we have to create our own solutions to our own problems. When you said 3 crore, suddenly the thing which flashed into my mind is Telugu film Srimantudu. He is one among these 3 crore people. Single man coming to, it is not just a film. Incidentally, in that film they show NIRD also. Very recently I watched it, sir, for second time. So he came, he studied, and he went back to village. Single man brought revolution, and this every entrepreneur out of 3 crore people whom we are looking for, I think it is a big mission where we need to prepare these people to bring changes. We don't have 3 crore people, in fact, 3 crore villages, in fact. So that is a very wonderful relation I could draw between your narration as well as these things. But now in rural areas, entire population is driven by aspirations. Earlier we had a problem. No, just to sow the aspirations in the minds of the people, it used to be a very difficult task. But now, thanks to 1,000 TV channels, what we have, all 24 hours they can run. Free electricity is anyway there, so people can watch. One study says that a farmer is busy for 187 days. The rest of the days he is free. It is one of the study. That means half of the year, entire farmer and farmer family, they have leisure time. That leisure time is consumed by social media and these 1,000 TV channels and other print media. These people are sowing the seeds of aspirations in the minds of the people. Now, this aspiration is leading to migration of little educated, 10th class, graduation, diploma. They don't see any glamour in the villages, so they move on to urban areas, DDU, KY. So, they will go through that route to urban areas. But so, how we can retain these people in rural area by creating urban facilities? Probably that sounds a practical solution for retaining our people here. We did a small experiment. We selected some 40 people in a Krishi Kendra near Warangal. They are village sons and daughters of farmers, and they are 10th class to graduates. We taught them basic agriculture for 45 days, and last week, 45 days, last week we called some agribusiness companies for placement. They recruited these people because we taught them basic agriculture. The salary given was 5,000 to 8,000 rupees. The job is work from home. They will just go around the village, tell about the technologies. 39 people out of 40 people, they were extremely happy. On the last day, they brought their parents for receiving, because it is a big joy for them getting 5,000 to 8,000 rupees. The same 8,000 rupees in city, probably he will disappoint, waste his 2 years and come back. But here, he will make an asset, he will be happy. And the last one person who got the training, he said, I will not opt for job. The reason, I have land, I thought this is some training program, but now I know enough how to make money in agriculture. I will apply all this technology in my farm and I will make more money than 8,000 rupees what I am going to get in the job. So these 3 crore people, we are looking this kind of transformation. Can we create urban atmosphere in rural areas? We have Uber and Ola. Can we create rural Uber and rural Ola? It is just possible. It can, technology is available. If it is possible in Hyderabad, why not in a small village in Adilabad? Scale of business will be less, profit margin will be very less. Technology is very much available. People want this kind of service. Rural Ola and rural Uber or Agri Ola or Agri Uber is need of the time, and necessary manpower is available. Let us take just urban examples. We have a concept called a service provider called urban company. What they are doing, I think all the people are using. You want hair cutting, he will come and haircut. You want painting, they will come and paint. Your TV is not working, they will come and repair the TV. You just ask whatever you want, people come. So this, whether this kind of services are not required in rural areas, definitely they are required. You want a good tailor, you will not get a good tailor in rural areas. You want a painter, you will not get a good painter in rural areas. So this urban company can become a rural company. And what they are charging here, their operating cost is very high. But half of the cost, same services can be given in rural areas, so that urban facilities can be created in rural areas, so that people can, with available money, they can enjoy urban facilities and migration can be, stopped. And Amazon, Flipkart is a big revolution. Why they are not giving service in rural areas? Because the scale of business is not so high. But rural Amazon and rural Flipkart, absolutely there is a scope actually. They can operate with a less profit margin, cover 10, 20 villages. A small entrepreneur, 3 crore entrepreneurs whom we are talking, everyone is capable of handling such small enterprises, e-trading platforms, service provision to the doorstep of the rural people. I just take an example of our own example, that Kutumbashri. Kutumbashri is, I am really influenced by the success of Kutumbashri because of the rural innovations what they made. If somebody is sick at village, to go to city to a good hospital, they have to get into the bus. For that they have to spend money. Lot of health problem, they cannot get into the bus. And somebody has to accompany them. It is not one person, it is 2 people. go to the urban hospitals, wait there from morning to evening, and they lose two wages actually, and finally get another bus, spend lot of money in urban hospitals. But Santwanam is one of the activities in Kutumbashri where people can pay 10 rupees, 20 rupees, and they can get BP checked and their sugar is checked. Person will go to their house in rural areas. So this also create self-employment opportunity which is quality driven, and what he can earn, you have 5,000, 6,000 rupees, that is more than sufficient, which is other than agriculture what he is doing, that activity can be undertaken. If you have, 5-star luxury hotels in urban areas, we can create agri-tourism spots in rural areas, which not only can create entertainment opportunities for rural people, but also attract more urban people to come and stay and pay money to the rural population. So, creating urban facilities in rural areas, we can create self-employment opportunities, we can plant enterprises, entrepreneurs, and bring lot of urban facilities to the doorstep of the rural population, and rural people will remain in rural areas. Then only we can produce 400 million tons, which is required by 2050. Otherwise, people will not be left in rural areas. They will go to urban areas. Shrinking land and population will threaten our food security. India's food security is threatened. I don't think any country can feed us. But if we are rich, sufficient, we can feed the globe. So that is the situation. Agriculture will become a very profitable enterprise in the days to come, because less number of people are going to pursue agriculture. Agriculture produce will become costly. If you see the prices of vegetables, cereals and pulses, we can see what exactly is going to happen by another 5 years, 10 years. But somebody has to do it professionally, profitably. At the same time, they can also pursue other enterprises. Food processing is one important area where we have not exploited even 5-10% of the total potential. 20% what we are producing is being wasted. But by zero waste policy, food processing or proper technology, if you can save that, that wealth will be added to rural areas. So these are all a few things, but sir, very nicely he gave a eagle view, but I have just came down little bit to the ground level just to give few examples. Very exciting talk, sir. It made us to think, and thank you.